But not all is as bad as I portrayed. There are a few islands of hope where reforms took place. Let me cite one of them, the third elementary education project. Or the TEP. This was a project funded by a loan from the World Bank and the Japan Bank for International Cooperation. This project implemented school-based management, or what they call SBM, in 188 divisions, affecting more than 8,000 schools, or about a fourth of all elementary schools in the country. As practiced in the Philippines, SBM is a framework that integrates school governance with various school-level inputs for achieving equitable access to quality education. In a sense, it is similar to the comprehensive school reform, which you must be familiar with, which was adopted by the US in the wake of its education crisis in the 1990s. I also have not realized, and I have to read more about this, that you still have an education crisis up to now. Like the CS. Although they started out with lower average scores in 2002, they consistently outperformed schools in provinces that were poor. They also ranked as well, if not better, than schools in non-poor divisions, a performance TEP schools would sustain beyond project completion in 2008. I will run the slides rather quickly. This slide shows performance on the National Achievement Test. A higher percentage of TEP schools crossed the 75% and 60% levels. The top two lines are TEP schools. At the very least, they were at par with the non-poor divisions. The non-poor division there is Pampanga, what we call Pampanga Plus. I actually explain the basis for what's poverty, what's poor and not. Since we have so many indicators of poverty, we had to go through all the indicators and classify them depending upon how they were. That very few schools met the minimum mastery level of 75% says much about our education predicament. Then I show that schools which need extra help, because they have always been at the margins, are the so-called multigrade and incomplete schools, the schools headed by teachers in charge who have to juggle teaching and administration, and schools with significant indigenous populations. Actually, your handout tells you how many they are. Note that in the Philippines, multigrade schools suffer because educators think in a linear way. Multigrade teaching is common in the North, in the US, in Australia, except that they don't look down on multigrade teaching. Anyway, no, even the university, just to give you an idea, in fact, even UP does not prepare its students for multigrade teaching, considering that almost a third of the country's elementary schools, actually almost a fourth, or more than a fourth, are multigrade. Anyway, TEP took affirmative action and paid special attention to these schools. Our economists in the team helped them justify this move after the fact by doing counterfactual analysis to show just how much the schools were pulling down the performance of their divisions. The results were interesting. Okay, those are the problematic ones. This slide shows that within the TEP divisions, these schools still lag behind the complete monogrades. Outside TEP, however, these schools were left completely behind. This was the same story for small monograde schools headed by teachers in charge. While schools headed by teachers in charge in the country as a whole slid down the ranks, they're all those on the left, it is important to note that the Philippines has had a long history of education reform. Although our education system evolved from a colonial cocoon, the American colonialist agenda nevertheless included a reformist seed. It made elementary education compulsory to enable mass participation in elections and thereby break the hold of our oligarchy. By so doing, the US had hoped to undermine the elitist educational system under Spain that left the Filipino masses. Sorry, I have to propose. I'm not very familiar with my technology, and now it says speak twice. Did not result in egalitarianism. Neither did it level the playing field in education. The education system in the early American colonial period supported prevailing inequities. But despite its class bias and colonial orientation, however, the reformist seed planted in the early days of American colonial period sprouted somewhat. As I noted earlier, it provided a means of social mobility for significant numbers of Filipinos. It also produced a critical mass of nationalist thinkers who pushed for social reforms in different periods of the 20th century. The establishment of the public education system heralded a series of reform-oriented initiatives with very progressive assumptions. They must have been informed or enlightened by John Dewey's philosophy of education. Consider the 1925 Monroe Survey. Yale professor George Counts was part of this team. In October 1925, show his face, his assessment of the key problems of Philippine basic education sounded very much like the issues confronting the country today and all the analysis done by the World Bank and all that. He revealed the teaching of subjects in English in the absence of a lingua franca. He argued that this sacrificed efficiency of instruction in the native tongue. Counts also argued that the curriculum was not suited for Filipino children in the 1920s. They were handicapped by their reliance on experiences drawn from a civilization outside them. Most of you here, most of us learned to read English books where we had Run, I don't know if we have the same books, Run, Jean, Run, Spot, Run, John, Run, and that was how we learned to read. So this is, our generation was still taught this way. Sorry. Various reviews have cited the same fundamental issues afflicting Philippine education. I listed a few of them. This prompted 4 leading educationists to facetiously say that the Philippine education landscape has not changed since colonial days. Despite years of diagnosis, prognosis, and reform initiatives, Philippine education remains in crisis. More than 80 years since the Monroe Survey, thus, pupil achievement has remained low. Teachers do not have the necessary competencies. In fact, in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao, I was very shocked to find out that the math teachers have grade 2 competence, at least the ones teaching in Muslim Mindanao. The debate on language rages. The curriculum and therefore its implementation continue to be problematic. Resources remain inadequate. Governance is still centralized despite the passage of a law decentralizing education 8 years ago. But the picture, of course, is not all that gloomy. Although the same issues have persisted since the 1920s, a review of the last 40 years reveals significant changes within and outside education institutions. And I will just mention very briefly some of them today. One of them is the Congressional Commission on Education, which actually is a very comprehensive education reform program. And then the other one, there are many more aside from this. The other one is the most recent Basic Education Reform Agenda, or the BESRA, the latest framework of the Department of Education, the biggest bureaucracy that is bigger than our army. It employs 1/3 of our government employees. The reform agenda in this basic education, which is called BESRA, is comprehensive and articulate the most current discourses on learning. But why is the situation not turning around fast enough? The current agenda calls for the implementation of the 2001 decentralization law and the scaling up or the spread of the TEP experiment, which worked, which nobody claimed as working, and we were put in a very strange position of an evaluation team telling the Department of Education, hey, this experiment worked, and they were ignoring it. And you might try to understand later why. The Philippines is dead last in controlling corruption in the slide. An argument in support of the contention that institutions do matter is that Filipinos who are in other countries perform very well and have no problems with the rule of law, including all of you here. Okay. In much the same way that the DepEd, Department of Education bureaucrats who were involved in the TEP project had no problem with the project's corporate management norms while it was ongoing. So there must be something about the political, cultural environment that once you change, people perform well. What is clearly discernible in DepEd's reform activities over the last 20 years is its almost exclusive dependence on foreign-assisted programs that have pilot project components. It seems that reform activities were undertaken only as DepEd moved from one donor-funded project to another. This is due in part to budgetary constraints because you only have 8% for operations. However, this is only one side of the story. Sometimes you feel money is not the problem, or not the only problem, or not even the major problem, except perhaps for the science schools.